I'm Petra Mayer with NPR Books, and I'm very excited to be here today with Whitney Leopard, the senior editor of the new RH graphic novel Imprint.
Yeah, nice to meet you guys.
Yeah, so I feel like...
I just also want to say, I know Gina Gagliano was also supposed to be here. She apologizes. Her plane was extremely delayed, so she should actually be landing right now, so I don't think she's going to make it to the panel.
You'll just have to be twice as entertaining.
Yeah, so bear with me.
We'll do our best. Well, first, just tell me a little bit about the Imprint.
Yeah, so Random House Graphic, RH Graphic, is the new imprint at Random House Children's Books. We focus on books for children and teens, and when it comes to like genre, we're basically doing everything. Our main goal is to create a graphic novel for every type of fan, every type of reader, anyone who likes, you know, giant high concept sci-fi stories to someone who just likes fun, simple adventures about friendship. Like, we want to have a graphic novel for everybody.
You're doing nonfiction too, right?
Yes, we are also doing nonfiction.
Why was it important to you to include that?
Because me and Gina are actually huge fans of nonfiction. So that's completely biased, which is one of the fun things about whenever you start your own imprint, is that you kind of get to choose the subject matter that you include. And we wanted to include nonfiction books because we felt it was an avenue that it's definitely been tapped into, but hasn't been explored enough with graphic novels.
Speaking of being able to choose your own books that you're publishing, your first slate of books is coming out in January?
Yes.
Yeah, well, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you've chosen?
Yeah, so we actually did a big announcement on the books yesterday, so y'all might have seen them. But our first books coming out, we have The Runaway Princess, which is a book about a princess who does not want to be a princess. She wants to go out and do adventures. So it's a very fun kind of adventure middle grade book. Then we have a book called Bug Boys, which is a younger chapter book that is about these two best friends who explore the world around them, and it's all from the perspective of bugs. So it's
really cute.
And then we have Aster and the Accidental Magic, which is about a girl who is forced to move from the city to the country for her mom's job, and she is expecting to be bored, but then she stumbles upon things out in the countryside that are not what they seem, and it is also a very fun adventure middle grade story. And then we have Witchlight, which is our YA graphic novel, which is about two women who are on this adventure where they both are kind of on this self-discovery adventure, and they find, they find their own relationship, but they find where they are meant to be in the world that they exist in, and it's a very beautiful fantasy story. It's
lovely. The art's gorgeous too. And I have to ask, just for myself, is Aster in any way, like, the font on the front of the book made me think of Asterix. Was that on purpose?
No, so Aster is a French translation. The original one is Aboupine, and the font that they use on the front cover is just our designer, Patrick Crotty, being amazing at what he does.
So some of these are in translation?
Yes.
Were they published originally overseas, or are they?
So actually, for our books, for our first list, which is those 4 books I just mentioned, Aster and the Accidental Magic and The Runaway Princess were both originally French translations that we brought over from France. And then Bug Boys and Witchlight are both books that were originally self-published by the creators, and then we are bringing over and adding additional material and coloring them. And that, for our first list, was mainly also because we wanted to get books out as soon as possible, and graphic novels take a long time, so we had to look for content that already existed. But moving after that list, we'll have a lot more original content that we are developing in-house.
So what was the process that went into choosing those 4 particular books? Like, what spoke to you about them that made you think, this is what we want to launch with?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it was kind of looking at the stories that are out there and looking at the stories that we wanted to see more of. And a lot of it was we wanted to see more stories of kids just having fun, kids exploring the world around them, stuff that focused on humor, stuff that focused on empathy, stuff that focused on, I mean, like, they each cover different things. So Bug Boys, which is our younger book, covers everything from, like, empathy and being scared and learning how to overcome, like, fear of the unknown, while at the same time it even has a chapter about what to do when your friendship is maybe not a positive friendship that you have in your life, and kind of how to cope with that. And it explores it in such a unique and just genuine way. So it's having those kind of stories and elements in those stories is what's made those books special to us.
I loved Bug Boys. It was really cute.
And it's called Bug Boys.
Yeah.
Like, come on, guys.
And it's about like two little beetles and their friends.
Yeah.
It's and a spider who is not scary because I'm scared of spiders, but Dome Spider was okay. Like,
All the insects are really cool in this book.
so I feel like the whole question of kids and comics has just been going in a circle. Like originally comics were blown off as kid stuff, and then maybe beginning in the 80s, like comics aren't just for kids anymore. I mean, there were so many of those headlines that I feel like you could almost have a drinking game. Like when you see one, just take a shot. And now we're coming back around to, yes, comics can be for kids. So what was that what drove you to want to create this new imprint? What was behind that decision?
Yeah, so whenever, my background is I was an editor at Boom Studios, and I focused on the Kaboom imprint and worked on books like Lumberjanes and stuff like that. So my space has always been with kids content and teens, and I've just always been very passionate about that. And so whenever Gina came up to me and was basically like, I am starting this new thing, this is what it focuses on, and we want to try even more, we want to expand upon what's already out there. We don't want to just regurgitate the books that we already have, because those books already exist. We want to create even more. We want to expand the choices, make even more books for more readers. I was just really excited about the opportunity, and so that's why I decided. And Gina's also super awesome. I don't know if you guys had a chance to meet her, but if you do, or if you listen to her podcast, Graphic Novel TK, where she talks about a lot of the business side of graphic novels as a whole, it's just, she's great, and she's really smart and informative, and y'all should definitely check it out.
I know, Gina's not here, so we can talk about her behind her back.
I know, I'm sitting here going like, it's been great.
So describe your respective roles, though. Was she the one that really pushed for the creation of the imprint, or?
Yeah, so so for the imprint, basically Judith Houth at Random House Children's Books knew that she wanted to have a graphic novel focused imprint, because she saw graphic novels, and Random House Children's Books had been doing graphic novels because they have Five Worlds and Cardboard Kingdom and Baby Mouse, and they have this whole collection of graphic novels that they've been doing, and they've been doing well. But she saw that there was a need for it, and she wanted to bring in people who that was the focus, and so that was what they were passionate about. And so whenever she was looking around, she started having conversations with people, and one of the people was Gina, who was working at First Second at the time, and was basically like, so if you could start your own imprint, what would it look like? And Gina was just like, oh, well, and told her whole like dream of what her own imprint would look like. And Judith agreed, and then offered Gina a job, and Gina started the imprint. And from there, Gina knew that she knew that she needed an editor, and thus and so she was looking at people who had experience, especially with kids content, because in a lot of graphic novels, she wanted people who had experience with the comic market, the direct market, graphic novels, and especially when it came to kids and teens. And there aren't a lot of people who primarily focus on that. There are people who have worked in it, but there's not a lot of people who have that primary focus. So whenever she was talking to a lot of people and talking to her friends and contacts, I was one of the names that came up, and we got to talk, and we realized that we work really well together, so we teamed up together. And Patrick Crotty, who's the designer, are y'all familiar with Piao Books? It's an indie publisher. Y'all should definitely check them out. They're all beautiful books, but it's a passion project that Patrick runs. He's one of the co-creators of this company, and he still runs Piao, but he wanted to, whenever we told him about the imprint, he was like, I definitely want to be part of this and want to be the designer of this imprint. So he is now our designer. And then we also have Nicole Valdez, who will be our new marketing person starting next month, because she still currently works with DC, so.
So maybe this is an overly broad question, but I mean, you're creating this whole new thing from scratch. What's it like to start a new imprint?
It is so exciting and also extremely nervous, because it's nerve-wracking, because basically you have these people who believe in you. Like, okay, if you're ever going to be starting something and you're starting it with another company, make sure that company believes in you and believes in the stuff that you're doing, because you need to have that faith to get off the ground. And if you go in and they already are having doubts before you even made a single decision, it might not be the best situation for you. But with Random House Children's Books, they truly believe in graphic novels and with the vision that Gina and I have for the imprint. So they've been nothing but supportive. So whenever we're making these decisions and we're like, no, these are the books we should do. This is how we should present it. This is kind of like this is how Random House does things, and this is how we know we can take it to the next level for graphic novels. It's also nerve-wracking because, like, what if we're wrong? And so we're out there, and they're taking a chance with us, but it's something that I think is honestly going to pay off in the long run, and it's going to be, it's just great teamwork, and it's great to work for a company that believes in everything that we're doing.
That does help when you're doing something like this. But so what were some of the challenges, though, that you had to deal with?
I had to move to New York from Los Angeles.
Oh, my God.
In the middle of winter.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I was not used to winter. So this past December, if you saw someone walking around New York in one of those jackets like this, that was probably me. But, I mean, joking aside, honestly, the hardest thing has been deciding what to publish, because we've been getting a lot of submissions, and we are limited on the books that we can produce because we have a small team, and we want to make sure that we can give each book that we work with the time and the attention that it deserves. And so that means we can only greenlight so many books. And we have so many amazing submissions that come across our desk, and we have to look at it and be like, we understand that this is great, but how does it take our imprint to the next level? How do we continue to grow our imprint with this title? And that can be hard sometimes, because there are creators out there who are amazing, who we believe in 100%, and we're looking at it and going like, it's just not the right fit right now. Like, maybe one day we will grow enough where we will be able to do more projects like this, but just not at this time. And that's been the hardest thing, at least for me specifically.
So that's interesting, actually. Like, what's the criteria that you look for? Like, what makes an RH graphic novel?
Well, good character stories. I get a lot of pitches where sometimes people will focus more on the world, which sometimes they have like these amazing worlds, and I'm like, I definitely want to see this world, but I have no idea why this world should exist because I don't know anything about the characters. And the characters are really important when it comes to children's publishing, because the characters are who the reader's attached to. So that's usually the first thing that helps get a project, whether it moves one way or the other, is how strong are the characters in the story.
And so we've been talking about challenges. Was there anything that was easier than you thought it would be? Something that you were afraid of, and then you went, oh, that wasn't a big deal?
Yeah, I mean, well, for me personally, I was coming from a smaller company, which is Boom Studios, which whenever I left was like around 42 people, to Penguin Random House, which is a lot more than just 42 people. They have an entire building. So I was very nervous of basically making a decision to go here and then getting lost in the shuffle, because it's always a worry whenever you're working with something where you're like, oh, this is going to be a very corporate atmosphere. But honestly, it's not that way. And so whenever coming in, it has felt like a tight-knit group working together.
That's nice. I'd be totally scared if I was in that position. What was something that you didn't expect?
Like what do you mean?
Just something about the process that you hadn't expected that you would have to deal with, or something that happened that you didn't think would happen?
I mean, a lot of it is just different approaches to, different approaches of organization, and different approaches for what kind of markets you run a book against. I was working at Boom is very direct market focused company, and so I'm used to talking about the direct market, used to talking with comic book stores and focusing on that, and suddenly I went to a space where it was like bookstores, and now we're talking about this. We still need that direct market knowledge, but primary source at Penguin Random House is bookstores, because they are primarily a prose publisher. And then so from kind of going to that mindset and having a conversation with them about like, well, where do we need to focus, how do we make sure that we're not just focusing on bookstores so that we're leaving out this other market, because I do think the direct market is very important, but how do we also make sure that we're basically acknowledging the importance of both these markets and making sure that our imprint is accessible to both of them, even though they are completely different. And that's been a challenge.
It seems like there's just so much that goes into creating an imprint and putting these books out there that I can't, I'm an editor by trade, so I can't even imagine all of the moving parts.
Well, it's actually been really fun, because there's been a lot of, there's a lot more stuff where I remember I came in and I was just like, well, I'm an editor, so I don't need to worry about anything except for editing books. Yep. Just focusing on story. And then people come up and be like, so we're going to have a conversation about the logo. And I'm like, why am I there to talk about the logo? And it's just like, oh, we need to talk about branding, and then we need to talk about the overall image of the imprint. And it's stuff that I never considered because I was just like, well, I'm only worried about the content. You guys worry about that stuff. But the fact is that we are the imprint, so we have to understand how we're representing ourselves, how we're putting ourselves out there. And the company wants to stay true to what our image is. So they come to us and they're like, this is what our idea is. Is it matching with what your idea is? How can we make sure that we're all working together? Which has been fantastic because, you know, again, it's that teamwork and collaboration, but it's also, there's so many different aspects of things that I didn't really consider. Like if marketing's like, oh, well, so for airports, we want to have a shelf. And I'm like, you have comic books at airports? Like,
You've flown into San Diego, right?
Yeah, but it's one of those things where I'm sitting here going like, I just never considered it. And then it's basically just opening this whole new world and being part of these conversations where stuff I really never had to consider, but now I'm actually grateful for because it's showing different parts of just the industry that I never worried about because I was so focused on just helping create the content.
So it sounds like the people at this imprint are involved, that they don't just stay in their lanes, that they're involved across all aspects of creating and marketing and publishing. Mm-hmm. Is that peculiar to your imprint, or is that a thing that's just general in the industry?
Honestly, I can't speak for the whole industry because it's a very big one. But I can say that I do feel like that there is a lot more collaboration, at least at Random House, especially in Random House children's books, where they want everyone to have a say because they want everyone to be on the same page, because there might be something where you're like, I'm 100% this direction because I haven't even considered this thing over here. And then so to have those conversations and that collaboration, it makes sure everyone's seeing everything. And sometimes that might mean that you still go the other way, but at least everyone's informed.
And I want to go back to, we've sort of touched in passing, and you mentioned the image that the image of the imprint and the image that you want to convey. Can you talk a little bit about what that image is and how you arrived at that being the idea?
Of our logo? I mean, so the image we wanted to convey, well, it started off whenever we sat down and we were like, okay, well, we have to have a tagline. We want to have a tagline. And it was just like, how can you put a comic, like a company, into just like one line that you sell, like, you know, it's maybe she's born with it. Like, it's like, how can you do that for an imprint that's supposed to cover every genre, how do we do that? And it was just like, we went over taglines at other companies. We were looking at them and being like, well, how do these work? Do they relate to the company? Is it something that they did and it completely missed the mark, but they were stuck with it for the rest of the time that the company was around? Like, we did a lot of research, and it was stuff that we went into, but then we had like a list of like 50 things where, I mean, like a lot of it was like same iterations, just slightly worded different before we landed on a comic on every bookshelf, which is the tagline that we came with for our imprint. And it's something that we truly think, just shows what we hope to achieve, which is creating a book, a graphic novel that would really fit out there for any reader.
Which makes me also want to ask, I mean, obviously we're all comics fans here, but if you had to sort of sit down and think about why is it important for there to be a graphic novel on every shelf, and what young readers get from graphic novels that they don't get from chapter books, what would...
Well, it's the visual medium. I mean, that's the biggest thing. Like, I know a lot of times, I was talking to one of my friends who was a librarian, and the way she got graphic novels across, she was like, well, it's for kids who don't like to read, you reluctant readers. But then after a while, she actually hated that that's how she got the book in, because graphic novels aren't for reluctant readers. Graphic novels are for readers. Like, it's just a different way of reading because you have this visual element alongside. And in a lot of ways, sometimes graphic novels can even be harder to read because you have that visual element to go alongside. And you have these like expressions that you have to make sure you're translating in an accurate way, that it's not like you have a panel that says like, they're angry, and then the characters being like, I'm angry, like, except for maybe like a Hulk comic. But like, hopefully that's a little more clear. So it's one of those things where I think the challenge with like a graphic novel on every bookshelf is because we want graphic novels to be recognized as a medium themselves, as something that they are literary and they belong everywhere, and they can have something for everybody, and it's not just this niche market, which I think a lot of people are recognizing now.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's a thing that kind of drives me nuts, because it's it's a sentiment that gets applied to a lot of literature that's culturally devalued. Well, at least they're reading, like, oh, graphic novels, well, at least they're reading. But that's not the case. Graphic novels are a rich and, in places, difficult medium for people. Yeah. And it's very hard, I find, to write. It's easy to write a story that's just a story that somebody's going to read on the page, but it's very hard to write in a way that accompanies images. Mm-hmm. Those two things have to complement each other, and it's almost like learning another language.
Yeah.
Tell me how you worked with the authors. What was the process that you went through with them?
Yeah, so every editor tends to have a different process because we're all different human beings, and so there's not just one right way to create a graphic novel. My process, I am very collaborative. So whenever we have a story and we're working on the story together, I want it to be a conversation with the creator who we're working with. We want to talk about the outline. We want to talk about the pacing. I will give feedback and I will give notes being like, hey, I think this part might work better if we move it here, or what was your intention behind this? But it's all meant to be a conversation because it's still their book. It is still their idea, and the fact that it's their idea is what drew me to it. And so I want to make sure that no matter what, that we're staying true to their vision, and I'm not just like directing it. Like, I don't want it to be like Random House Graphic, all the books super edited by Whitney Leopard. Like, nobody wants to read that because like eventually all my books would be the same, and then you guys would be really bored. But it's my goal to help them make the best version of the story that they submitted to us. And so that's why I think it has to be a collaborative nature, and that's kind of the way I work with all the creators.
I think are we sitting on top of Hall H? Because like my feet are vibrating. It's probably the closest.
It just started. I'm sitting here going like, wait,
what's going on?
I was sitting here about to be like earthquake.
Yeah, this is the closest I'm going to get to Hall H this year for sure. Sorry, I got sidetracked, but my feet are vibrating. It's very distracting. So for people that want to do what you do, both in editing and in maybe possibly getting into publishing, can you offer any sage advice?
I mean, if you want to be an editor, then definitely work with people, create relationships with people, let people know that you want to be an editor, and also let people know why you want to be an editor. Because there's a difference between going to people and be like, I want to be an editor because I actually want to be a writer. Because what you want to be a writer, but you want to get your foot into publishing, which is totally fine. But there's a difference between going, I want to be an editor so I can do this eventually, to being, I want to be an editor because I wanted to help people tell good stories. And meeting people and telling them about that, you never know what kind of doors it opens. Like literally, whenever I was in college, especially like my senior year, I made sure everyone who I knew, like I talked to, I'd be like, I want to be an editor, and they're like, okay, Whitney, like, congratulations, like, that's nice, like, good luck with that. And then, but it was like 2 years after I graduated that I had a friend who like hit me up and was just, who was my TA, and was like, so I know an editor who's looking for an assistant, and she asked for reference, and you're the only person I've ever known who said, I want to be an editor, so your name popped up, would you be interested? And that's how I ended up getting hired at Boom Studios.
It's true, I don't know that a lot of people at that age go, I want to be an editor.
Well, I knew I wanted to be in comics because I went to SCAD. I majored in sequential art, and while I was there, I discovered editorial was a career that people had because they had editors come visit to talk to the students there. And while it was a very art-focused school, it was one of those things where like I had not connected with a specific point in the medium. I knew I liked working on projects and I liked working with people on projects, but I never knew like, well, how can I actually make a career out of this? And then editors came like from the sky to talk to the poor students, and I was just like, wait, what? Like, let's have a conversation. And then so from there, I got to meet editors and talk to them about their jobs, and some of them were super helpful, some of them were super not, but you know, it's just one of those things where it's going to be hit or miss with people. If you want a job in publishing, I would say kind of figure out what your goal is with that job. If your goal with publishing is you're like, I want to put out like these books that I am passionate about, don't hesitate to even like do a startup where you're like, I'm going to help people put out books, so I put out 1 book a year. I'll put out, and then once I'm satisfied with that 1 book, like I'll put out 2 books a year. That's how a lot of imprint, like a lot of publishing companies start. They start small, and you get that experience, and that experience helps you understand being like, oh, this is 100% what I want to do. Or you're like, you do 1 book, and you're like, no, never, nope, this is not for me. But that experience helps you, and it helps you see like what you're good at, what you're not good at, what you can work on, and it also helps you make connections, because people like to talk to other people who are doing the same things, because we like to know, being like, so this is how I did this, how would you have done it? And working together to make, because everyone who I've met in the comic industry, and maybe I've just been very lucky, everyone who I've met has wanted to help continue making the comic industry better and continue to grow the industry. I have not met anyone who's just like, you know what, it's peaked. Comics aren't going anywhere. We're done. Like,
No, who would say that?
yeah, Marvel's done 10 years of movies, so that's it. We're good. We're settled. Let's just cap it here. Everyone wants to improve, and they want to build, and they want to continue to make more spots for it, because if you continue to build the industry, you continue to let more people in the industry, and hopefully you will also be one of those people who are let into the industry. And so it's one of those things where I think people are generally just want to be helpful to each other.
That's so nice. I want to rewind a little bit, though, because you talked about how the experience of publishing can help you learn about what you want and what your style is. What's that experience been like for you? What have you learned about your own processes and interests through this, through starting this imprint?
I did an anthology when I was a student, and it made me learn that I needed to work on my patience. Because I was not very patient with my fellow classmates who I was doing the anthology with. And then I realized that that was a shortcoming, that you definitely need to have patience if you want to be an editor, because you are working with people, and people have lives, and life happens. You can't plan for life. You never know what's going to come your way.
No, get me my copy now.
Yeah, exactly. And that was something that I had a very real, I lucked out that it was a very real lesson in college in a very informal setting versus at a publisher setting. But those experiences where it's something where you have a friend who's like, oh, will you proofread this comic for me? And you're like, cool. And you proofread it, and then you turn it in, and then they print it, and then you read it again. And you're like, wow, I gave them such bad advice, because the grammar in this is so bad, because I'm very bad at grammar, and I'm very bad at like spelling, and I'm very like finding what your shortcomings are can also be like, you might be like, oh, but that's terrible, like you just let your friend down. Like, no, it still helped, like you're still helping them. Hopefully you made the script somewhat better, but hopefully at the end of the day, you're learning from your own mistakes so that you can build a better, like better practices with yourself, so that whenever an opportunity does come up, you're able to meet that opportunity. And a lot of times having that experience and that confidence, being able to go like, I have published a book, I have helped people, I helped someone run a Kickstarter, I have helped someone do something, and because of that experience, I learned this, is going to be a lot more interesting to a future employer, future partner than, well, I just think it's cool, and so I really want to explore this. I have no experience, I just think it, it just sounds really cool, like editor, one of those things. So having that experience will mean a lot more to people you talk to.
That reminds me of an editorial question that we always ask in my line of work, which is if you come up with a story and you say, oh, this is cool, okay, what's your second question? What's the point? What's the reason? So what are you working on now in your own sort of editorial evolution?
I mean, right now, the main thing I've been working on is managing time, because one of the things that I've learned with Random House Graphic is we are exclusively graphic novels. And I came from a place where I did single issues and graphic novels, which is a very different schedule. And every now and then I have a moment where I'm sitting here going like, I get back to single issues where I'm like, this has to go to print in like 3 weeks and we're doomed. But it's not, because I actually have a year, or I have 6 months, or we have the time, because graphic novels take longer to make. And so it's not this high pressure schedule. And so it's actually learning from that to be like, okay, the house is not on fire. So how do I work in an environment in which I have the time to create this content, versus where if you're in an environment where it's just always fast-paced all the time, you tend to get stuck in that, where you're like, this is just how things work. And so I'm currently in a process of retraining myself in that.
Yeah, it's hard. It is like kind of learning a new language or a new way of working, a new sort of gear in your mind. So usually I ask people like, how have readers responded to your work? But it's not out until January, so I will ask instead, what do you want a reader to take away from a Random House graphic novel? What feeling, what lesson, what experience?
I mean, I would like for a kid to pick up a book that we've done, or a reader to pick up a book that we've done and be like, this is the book I've been waiting for. This is the book I wish we had 5 years ago, 10 years ago. This book was a book I was missing when I was younger, but this book is perfect for my kids now. This book is perfect for, so-and-so now. That's the kind of, there's so many stories out there that still need to be told, and there's so many lessons out there that still need to be, brought to life, especially as a graphic novel, and I hope that we are able to do that in our books.
I hope so too. But actually, that makes me wonder, are there books that you have chosen for this imprint that are ones that you feel that way about, that you wish had been around when you were little?
Yeah, so there's actually a book, Stepping Stones, which we have like a small preview at our booth, which is number 1515. I'm pretty sure. It's on my Twitter. But and it's called Stepping Stones. It's by Lucy Knisley, and so it's her
I love her.
Yeah, it's her first middle grade book, and it's a book about her parents separated, so she got forced to move to the country, and her stepfather also has children, and so it's these two families that did not get raised together are now being combined, and so it's like this new family dynamic, and it's about this girl who feels like she doesn't necessarily belong in that dynamic. And that's a book I would have murdered somebody for when I was like 12 and going through that as a kid. Like I needed that book to tell me that what I was going through was not just me, because there's a lot of times where like you'll experience stuff, especially as a kid, where you feel like you are the only one experiencing it, and that can be extremely isolating to you and the people, like to the people around you, because you're like, they won't understand. So then to have stories like that reflect those stories, will reflect that emotion that you're going through, I think helps kids be like, I'm not the only one, which actually means a lot, especially whenever you're going through harder stuff like that. Not all of our books are like serious like that, but those books I do think matter, and they need to be made.
Absolutely. And I like talking about it in a place like this, because I think the whole ethos of Comic-Con is, oh my God, I'm not the only one. I look out there, and whatever fandom I have that's so obscure, there's going to be somebody who understands it and has the same feelings. It's one of my favorite things about fandom and this place in general. So before I turn it over to you guys and make you do my job, we've talked about your first slate of books that's coming out in January. Can you give me a sense of what's next? What's in the pipeline for you guys?
Yeah, so those books are basically January, February, March, and April. Stepping Stones, which is Lucy Knisley's book, is coming out in May. I will not say the other books because I don't think I'm allowed to. But we have exciting books that have music, that have people being haunted by their distant relatives. We have books about fairy tales. We have books like they're covering everything from friendship to growing old, to understanding what growing old actually means when you're a kid, and it's like, and your concept of what old is a lot different than what when you're an adult, and what your concept of what old is, and just dealing with fun adventures. We have, like, even in our first year, I feel like we have a little bit for everybody, so I'm excited to see how people respond to it.
That sounds wonderful. I'm looking forward to it. So if people have questions, now's your chance. There's microphones. Step up to the mic.
Hello.
Hey.
I appreciate this. I am a nonfiction writer, so what kind of nonfiction are you guys thinking about producing? What are you interested in?
So we're looking for, a little bit of everything. Some nonfiction books that we are working on, and one's the history of dessert. So
Ooh, I would totally buy that.
Yeah, I was like, I like this reaction. All right, y'all are gonna really like it. We also have a book that's about the infrastructure of basically the internet and other infrastructures that you find in cities of stuff you don't see. And that's another book that we have coming out. So whenever it comes to nonfiction, honestly, we're looking for a little bit of everything. But it's just something that we want to find things that you can really do something with in graphic novels, and it doesn't come off as just an illustrated textbook. So it's going to be something that you need to find like a fun approach to, sort of thing. And also right now they're handing out our brochure, which covers our books for the first year, but also just kind of talks a little bit about graphic novels and the stuff that we're doing. So I'm really excited for you guys to get to check those out.
Hi.
Hey.
So we talk about sort of this division that graphic novels are not taken seriously and not seen as literature. And it's almost like there's the creators on this side making all this really interesting content, and then the public that can't really find it. So I'm wondering if, because you guys are an imprint of Random House, you can reach that? Is that something that you guys are working on, or you see that working?
That's something that we're definitely hoping to achieve, because especially with as more book publishers would, serious publishers, like, I hate saying it that way, but that's how some people view it. As more of these publishers come into the market and they're like, no, graphic novels are a real thing and we need to be getting into this because this is a new format and it's an exciting format and it's something that we want to see with storytelling. I think that is opening the doors for graphic novels to be recognized as serious literature, which they are. Yeah.
Thank you. More questions?
Yeah. Yes.
Step up to the mic, sir.
Are you guys doing any offerings for young adult?
Young adult is the oldest that we're going, and so our young adult is focusing more on high school and like maybe like 19, 20. Like we're not going into like the new adult range, but we will be doing Witchlight, which is one of our first books, is YA.
Okay.
Yeah.
More questions?
Yeah.
13th Doctor, yes. I've been looking for Doctor Who stuff all day because it's my jam, and like you're the first person I've seen, so you make me very happy.
I'm glad I could be of service to you. Could you talk a little bit about your sort of vision of who the audience is for, or not who the audience is, but the popularity of middle grade versus young adult graphic novels? Because I feel like people in publishing are very focused on middle grade and, the next sort of Raina Telgemeier. YA is sort of relegated to like, well, it's like literary, but not as much of a focus. So I'd love to hear your vision of that.
I mean, my vision is, so middle grade's exploding right now, especially in the book market, and a lot of that is thanks to Dave Pilkey and Raina Telgemeier. They are, their numbers alone have made a lot of publishers turn and be like, graphic novels, interesting, which has been fantastic, and I love that is happening, but it also means that a lot of publishers are focusing on middle grade books, which I think is good because we do have a lot of middle grade stories out there, but we don't have all of the middle grade stories out there, and I think there's still a lot of stories that need to be told in that space. But the one thing that I find really exciting about it is that, so these readers that we're getting in the middle grade grow up. They age every year. They don't just stay 12 forever. They don't just stay 10 forever. So these kids who have been reading Dogman for 4 years, 5 years, they are now teenagers, and they are now looking for what that next story is, and they want to continue finding that. And so I think publishers are also at a space where they have to sit there and be like, okay, but so what's the teenage version of Dogman? What is the next, what is something that a kid who grew up reading Dogman would be really interested in? What is something that a girl reading or any kid reading the Babysitter's Club graphic novels would be interested in now as a teenager? And that's something that, just as a new publisher, that we are definitely considering and looking for, is trying to find those YA stories that don't have to be high literary or high or really dark, tragic stories, because I feel like every YA book I pick up, if I turn around and it's like, and then they die at the end. And it's just like, what happened to, happy stories? We all made it out of high school, right? Maybe just barely, but, we all made it. So it's one of those things being I feel like there is a definitely need for those stories because they wouldn't be publishing as many sad, tragic stories if there was an audience for it. But I do think that in YA, we need to create an even stronger and an even further developed different genres. We need to see more comedy. We need to see more light stories, because I also feel like if the only stories that you have are the same thing, then that's the stories people are going to, because these kids want to read. They want to read books, and if the only books they can find are tragedies of dying of cancer, or after you find your first love, then
Was that a subtweet?
but which book?
True point.
So that's one of those things where it's just I feel like there's a desperate need in YA for more stories, and that's definitely something that I hope we achieve with graphic novels, but honestly something I hope we achieve in more prose as well. Yeah.
Well, as a librarian, I have to ask, will there be any ARCs available, electronic or otherwise?
Yeah, so we had some ARCs available at ALA, did we? But yes, we will be we will be doing ARCs for our books. So yeah, we do have those available. Yeah.
Hi, thank you.
Yeah.
Given Gina's experience with First Second, will you be doing any translated properties?
Yeah, so 2 of our books from this first list are translated from French.
Great.
Yeah.
I tried to read as many Eisner nominees this year as I could. I didn't get to them all. But I was struck by that the titles that were sort of young adult or mid-grade or even kid-focused titles, tended to be some of the strongest work out there. And I know, particularly in prose, these things are, attracting older readers, even though it might be something that's marketed as mid-grade. Is that something that you're taking into account in your?
Yeah, I mean, well, I don't. It's kind of like self-grandizing. Have any of y'all read Petals, which is a book that was nominated for an Eisner this year? It's for a younger audience, but it's a completely silent comic. And the only reason I bring it up is because I worked on it, so that's also why I can talk about it. But it's a book I did with Kaboom. But it's a completely silent comic. It was a translation, so it exists. It was in South America originally, and then we brought it over to the States, and it's tragic. It is I remember bringing it up to people being like, this is our next kid's book and we need to do it. And they read it, and like people came into my office like crying, being like, kids can't read this. And I'm like, what makes you think kids don't deal with loss? And what makes you think that kids can't have these hard conversations? And I think having books like that where a publisher will be like, okay, we'll take this chance, but then having it recognized by institutions like the Eisners, or having it put on, getting great reviews or bestseller lists or recommendation lists and stuff like that, helps publishers see that, like, oh, so this book that we might not have thought would have hit is being recognized, and it's being recognized as a story for that audience. And I think that's something that, like, the Eisners definitely help with whenever it comes to publishers kind of choosing what they're allowed to play around with and what they're allowed to experiment with.
Hi, I'm a student in college right now, and I'm actually majoring in publishing, and I'm wondering, like, what is the first step out of college? Like, where do I go after?
Well, I mean, my first step was moving to a city I could afford to live into. But everyone has kind of like a different things that they have to consider. But while you're in college, I would look at internship opportunities. I know a lot of publishers do paid internships, and some of them even do paid internships after college because their intention is that they might hire you from that. But that's a good way to get your foot in the door. Another way is to just go to shows and meet with those publishers and see the kind of books that they're doing, and kind of finding what kind of books you want to work on, because there might be something where you're like, well, I want to work on graphic novels. Well, you don't want to just like send your application out to every single graphic novel publisher ever, because you want to work on graphic novels, like, do you want to work on any kind of graphic novel, or do you have a specific kind of graphic novel that you want to work on? Like, kind of do that research for what kind of companies you want to work for and what the companies are putting out there, because whenever you make that decision and you go for them, you don't want to end up in a place where you're like, well, I'm here and I'm putting out these books, but I actually don't believe in any of the content that I'm putting out, because that gets reflected, and that also kind of makes you look like a bad employee, so it becomes hard to get picked up by a later publisher. But if you find something that you're passionate about and something that you can truly believe in, even if it might not be your dream job yet, that is a better reflection of you and your work as you kind of get into the industry. Yeah.
Questions? If nobody has one, I have one, actually.
Yeah.
Building on the idea of what you want to do when you're just starting out in your career, this is something that I deal with a lot, is people who don't know how to pitch. So for you, when you're looking at creators, what makes a good pitch, and what advice would you give people who are learning how to pitch?
I like pitches that have a summary that actually explains what the story is. Like, I don't read the summary and I'm going like, what? Because if I can't read 2 paragraphs that explain what the story is, then I'm not quite sure you understand what the story is, and then we're going to have like a little confusion there. But typically in a pitch packet, what my like must-haves is a summary, which is just like 2 paragraphs, and then a full outline, which typically I don't want longer than 2 pages, because I don't have time to read 10 pages of your epic sci-fi space drama. But I do have time to read 2 pages of an outline for your story, and that outline needs to focus on character growth, and it needs to focus on the major points of the story. And if I read it and I read your outline, and all I can think about is like, well, now I know the full history of how Planet X destroyed Planet Y, but I actually have no idea about the story you're trying to tell, then that makes it kind of hard to move forward with. And also people who tend to pitch 60 pages of complete art. So if they come to me and they're like, I have a 100-page graphic novel and I've already completed majority of this graphic novel, I want you to consider it. I feel a little bad sometimes because most graphic novels, like especially if you're working with an editorial team, those pages you pitch are most likely not going to be used. And a lot of people get upset with that because they're like, no, I want you to take my story as is. But if I was going to take your story as is, I wouldn't really need my job, because that's not what an editor is. Like, you can go get your book published at a publishing house that doesn't have like an editorial department that just produces books. But if you have a story where you're like, this story is someone that I actually want to work with someone on, then only having like 5 pages of complete artwork is like, that's all that's necessary. It just needs to show your, just show the story that you want to tell, how you visually see it. You don't need to have more than that, because graphic novels take a long time to make. That hopefully should not be a surprise to anyone here, but they take a long time. So having less, I think, is great when it comes to a pitch packet, but making sure that that few bits that you do have to show are like great content that really will stand out is what you really have to work on, if that makes sense.
You have a question?
Yes, I'm so glad you brought up the pitching question. I'm a school psychologist student, and I found that comic books helped me growing up, and so that's how I learned, and I really appreciate it. I love comic books, but I'm like not an expert in anything, but I found a lot of stories to relate to it, and so we're trying to create our own stories, and so when it comes to pitching, we're not very good illustrators, but we have a great story, we have great characters, we have a great concept. Does the illustration matter as much? Because I've been told both that yes and no, so I would like to hear from you.
So it depends. It depends on who you're pitching to, because some companies, they require you to be a complete team, and some companies are okay with you just pitching as a writer. If it's something where you're like, I am pitching for the story, I have no intention of drawing the story, but I am just pitching because I want to write the story, and then hope to be teamed up with an artist, that's fine, but only so many publishers accept just written submissions. There's other publishers where you need to have an artist, and if you're not a good artist, then that will count against the submission, because they'll look at it and be like, well, I might like the story, but they have this artist and I don't really like the art, and it's not my job to divide up the team because you came as a package deal. So it's one of those things, but it's also the same where there might be a story where the art is amazing and the story's weak, but the publisher isn't going to come to you and be like, well, we're only going to publish this just because the art. We're only going to publish this just because the writing. With graphic novels, it's a package deal, so you need both of them to be strong. But it's really hard for you. So it's one of those things where, like, if you know your weak point is art and you actually have no intention of drawing the book, then I would just look at publishers who submit just written submissions.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Questions? Step up. Come on, you guys have to do my job for me because I'm lazy. Well, actually, I do have one more question that I can ask. So this is kind of to rewind back a little ways when we were talking about graphic novels for different ages. And I was wondering how is it a conscious process of like designing your slate so that your audience will age up with you? How do you go about doing that?
So we have 3 age categories, which we've defined as 5 to 7, which is early reader, and that's Narwhal and Jelly, sort of books where they're past picture book, so they can start having some sequential elements, but they're not like full graphic novel quite there yet. And then middle grade, which is 8 to 12. Everyone at this point should be familiar with what middle grade is. 8 to 12, Raina, Dogman, and then we do YA, which is 13 to 18 or 13 to 20, and that has a much broader scope of stories right now, because I'm trying to think of off the top of my head if there's been like one YA story that's kind of like recognized as the YA story.
In graphic novels?
Yeah.
Not really. I mean, YA fiction, like novels, that's exploding. But it is interesting when you put that question to me, I can't actually think
Yeah.
of a YA graphic novel other than Witchlight, which I read last week and thought was lovely.
Spinning.
Spinning, yeah,
So
that's
spinning
true.
would be a good comp for a YA graphic novel. Everything else I'm thinking of, I think actually falls more into the adult category. So YA is what? Spill Zone.
Oh, I forgot about that, yeah.
So, but clearly YA needs more love. That's what we're getting at here. But those are the 3 age categories that our imprint is focusing on specifically. Different imprints will have different ranges. You can kind of tell what that is by actually like looking up the company. If you are going to submit and pitch to a company, I strongly recommend you look them up first, because there have been many times in which I have been pitched extremely adult content, extremely, where it's like sitting here going like, you didn't even Google me, like you didn't even try, and you just submitted this to me, and you were hoping, and then they get mad when I go like, I'm sorry, this isn't appropriate for our imprint. They're like, but how do you know? And it's like, it turns into a whole thing. Look up the imprint that you're submitting to make sure that your pitch is a right fit, because if you're sitting here going like, I want to do horror, like a straight up just horror story, and that's what I want to do, and you submit to a sci-fi imprint, like that's all they do, they just do sci-fi, and you have no sci-fi elements to your horror story, they're going to just think that you're wasting their time. So and you probably won't get a response back. So it's one of those things where like, if you guys are serious about pitching to companies, just look up the website, see if you can kind of look at the books that they've done. I know that we're a new imprint, so it's a little harder to see books that we're doing because our books don't come out until next year. But we do have that kind of content out there. You can go to our social media. We try to be as obvious as possible about the kind of books that we're putting together, so that hopefully people can find that information as readily as possible. And now we have a website, which is live, and you can find and you can look at the stuff that we can talk about.
Oh, yes, please.
Speaking of the website you just mentioned, are you going to have an open submissions policy?
Yeah. So our website currently does have an email where you can contact us, and we can talk further about submissions. Right now we do accept open submissions, so you can feel free to submit stuff to us. It will take time to get back to you because we do get a lot of submissions. I can honestly tell you that on an average I get over 50 a month that I have to then go through. And then so kind of keep that in mind whenever you do submit to publishers, that like most likely you're not going to get an answer immediately the next day. Sometimes you're lucky, sometimes you're not. So it's just one of those things to keep in mind, that it might take time.
All right, well, the nice men in the back are telling us that we're out of time, so thank you all for coming and for your thoughtful questions. And
Thank
thanks
you.
to Whitney for her thoughtful answers. Go forth and make comics.